Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty intense, a disaster analysis that, well, it really goes beyond just the weather itself. We're doing a deep dive into a specific event where, climate vulnerability really slammed into systemic issues, infrastructure failures, delayed responses, all hitting one of the most remote parts of the U.S.
That's right. We're talking about October 12th when the remnants of Typhoon Halong, which is unusual in itself, took this path right out of the tropical Pacific and hit the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in southwest Alaska.
Yeah, when you hear typhoon, you definitely don't picture the Bering Sea, Hawaii maybe, or Southeast Asia. But this storm, it just defied all the usual expectations.
Exactly. And our sources show it wasn't just the storm's power, which was immense, but how it exposed these cascading failures and how things were supposed to work. Preparedness, response.
Right. So our mission here is to really give you a clear picture of the specifics, the staffing cuts, the communication breakdowns, the bureaucratic holdups, everything that basically made a bad situation much, much worse.
We want to get past the headlines, understand the mechanics of, well, system failure, essentially.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate impact. What did it look like on the ground?
It was catastrophic immediately. The flooding, the wind damage, it forced this huge, unplanned exodus. Hundreds of people lost their homes, basically instantly.
And the stories we found in the sources, they really paint a picture of just chaos and urgency. People having just a few hours, maybe less, to grab one bag.
Just imagine that tiny window and having to make these impossible choices, leaving pets behind, family keepsakes, things you can't replace, just grabbing what you could carry and running.
It sounds absolutely terrifying.
And the scale of it required this enormous response effort. The Alaska National Guard had to step in, big time. They airlifted more than 1,500 people just to get them to Anchorage.
1,500 people.
Yeah, on military cargo planes. And you have to remember, the total Yupik Alaska Native population in that whole region is around 20,000 people. So we're talking about a really significant percentage of the entire regional population being moved forcibly in just days.
Wow. And Anchorage, the city receiving them, is like 500 miles away, right?
Right. Not exactly next door. And even Anchorage had to declare its own civil emergency, which is pretty rare, just to handle the influx, setting up shelters and sports arenas, convention centers, basically makeshift long-term housing.
That really shows how quickly local capacity was just overwhelmed. And the governor's estimate for people returning home.
Yeah, sobering is the word. Governor Dunleavy estimated it could be over 18 months before people can go back because the damage was just that severe.
A year and a half. That's effectively moving a whole community, potentially for good for some.
It's a massive disruption. And we also have to talk about the vulnerability before the storm. It wasn't just bad luck.
What do you mean?
Well, we found sources talking about mitigation efforts, things meant to protect these communities that had been stopped. Earlier that same year, a really important $20 million EPA grant, specifically aimed at improving flood protection and resilience right there in those communities, was just terminated, cut completely.
So a key layer of defense was already gone before this massive storm even formed.
Exactly. The ground was, in a way, less prepared than it could have been.
That definitely sets a disturbing context.
Okay.
So if the disaster was this huge, the first thing you look at is the warning. Could people have been warned better? Why wasn't the forecast, clearer sooner?
That's the critical question. And the sources point pretty directly towards federal service cuts potentially getting in the way of timely warnings.
Right. This is where we get into the technical side. NOAA, the National Weather Service.
Yeah.
These are the agencies responsible.
Correct. And what current and former NWS officials told reporters was stark. A majority of Western Alaska's weather balloon network simply wasn't working when the storm hit.
Weather balloons. Okay, I think most of us picture satellites, maybe radar on the ground. Why are these balloons still so important, especially out there?
They're absolutely vital in places like Western Alaska, these remote, data-sparse regions. Satellites, yeah, they see the tops of clouds, but balloons, they give you the raw data on the vertical structure of the atmosphere. Temperature, humidity, wind speed, wind direction, all at different altitudes. That data goes straight into the computer models that predict where a storm will go and, crucially, how strong it will be. Without that vertical profile, the models are just much less accurate. Flying blind, essentially, for certain key inputs.
And why weren't they operating? What was the reason?
Officials pointed squarely at staffing constraints, severe staffing issues. Apparently, back in April, NOAA had put in place what they termed degraded operations.
Degraded operations? What does that mean in practice?
It means they didn't have enough people. And according to the sources, this staffing crisis stemmed directly from budget restructuring under the previous administration. Policies aimed at streamlining government, cutting operational costs, often referred to by critics anyway as the Department of Government Efficiency Initiative.
Okay, can you just briefly explain the idea behind those cuts? What was the stated goal?
Sure, the stated aim was efficiency, right? Reduce the federal workforce, save taxpayer money, maybe eliminate what they saw as redundant functions. Part of the plan involved potentially shifting some services more towards state or private entities.
But the critics.
Well, critics, including former NWS people, argued that when you apply those kinds of broad cuts to essential science agencies like the NWS, you end up with critical staffing shortages. They literally didn't have enough trained personnel to launch the balloons from the required sites. They were stretched too thin.
So they lacked crucial atmospheric data, precisely when this unprecedented storm was approaching.
Exactly. And meteorologists agreed this likely hurt the forecast. The lack of that reliable, real-time balloon data, they said, contributed to big errors in the models the day before landfall.
How big were the errors?
Well, Rick Tolman, a former NWS meteorologist with deep Alaska experience, stated it pretty clearly. The storm's final track, its extreme intensity. That didn't become clear until it was within 36 hours of hitting Alaskan waters.
36 hours. That doesn't sound like much time for remote villages.
Tholman said exactly that. He noted 36 hours is, quote, too late for evacuations in many places, especially given how logistically difficult it is to move people in the Delta. You often need days, not hours.
So connecting the dots. The foundational data stream that everything else relies on was compromised.
Right, and when you have a powerful storm feeding off unusually warm water, like this one was over the Bering Sea, you need the best data possible. The margin for error just vanished. It made a timely, actionable warning basically impossible.
But okay, let's say, hypothetically, the forecast had been perfect. There was another problem, right? Getting the information out there.
Yes, the final mile issue. Distribution. This is where it gets really critical too. Even with a perfect forecast sitting in an office somewhere, how does it actually reach people in these incredibly remote, often poorly connected communities?
And this is another area where Rick Tolman raised concerns.
He did. He highlighted this chronic connectivity problem. In so many of the communities that got hit the hardest, just getting any updated forecast is, as he put it, very limited. They deal with poor, intermittent internet, spotty public radio signals. It's an ongoing struggle.
So a region already facing communication challenges, and then something else happened just before the storm.
Exactly. You have to talk about KYK. It's a native-owned public radio station based in Bethel, the biggest town in the area. It's a lifeline, really, a crucial communication link for dozens of smaller villages around it.
Okay. What happened with KYUK?
Sources say KYUK lost a massive chunk of its funding, 70% just the month before. This happened when the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is, the main channel for supporting local public media like KYUK, was dissolved.
Dissolved. As part of those same broader policy shifts.
Apparently so. Part of the same push to reduce federal funding and shift responsibilities.
So let me get this straight. The community's trusted, local source for emergency info, the station that speaks local languages, its funding gets slashed right before a major disaster strikes.
That's what the sources indicate. It's like a double whammy, degraded forecast data coming in, and then the primary way to get any warning out was significantly weakened.
It just compounds the failing.
There creates this dangerous information vacuum. If people can't get a warning because the forecast was late and they can't easily communicate locally because their radio station lost funding, they become totally reliant on outside help eventually getting to them.
Which brings us then to the federal response after the storm hit. And this is where we see that really shocking delay.
Yes. The immediate aftermath. Governor Dunleavy did what governors do. He requested a federal disaster declaration. That's the key step, the formal request needed to unlock major federal assistance.
And that assistance is mainly FEMA, right? Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Primarily, yes. That declaration authorizes FEMA to bring in everything from temporary housing and financial aid for individuals to massive logistical support equipment, personnel, coordinating resources. It basically opens the federal spigot.
Okay, so the request goes in. What happened next?
The problem was the timing. The president at the time didn't authorize it until nearly a week later. It was requested quickly after the storm hit, but the authorization didn't come until the following Thursday.
A week. How does that compare to what normally happens? for a disaster this big.
It's way outside the norm. Standard practice, especially for something of this magnitude, catastrophic flooding, mass displacement, is for that declaration to be signed within 24 hours, maybe 48 at the outside.
So fast, usually.
Because state resources get overwhelmed immediately in these huge events. They simply don't have the capacity for something like relocating 1,500 people and rebuilding entire villages. You need federal help fast. Samantha Montano, an emergency management expert we saw cited, called that week-long delay absolutely insane.
Insane. Strong words.
Yeah, and she elaborated. She said a disaster of this severity would normally get signed off on within a day of the governor asking. She called the delay a, quote, deeply alarming departure from what Americans have come to expect from the federal government in times of disaster.
So that delay wasn't just paperwork sitting on a desk. It meant a 7-day hold on things like temporary shelters arriving, clean water, specialized teams, while people were stuck 500 miles from home in arenas.
Precisely. And Montano and others connected this delay back to those larger policy aims we talked about. The sources noted this aligned with the administration's stated plan to eventually sort of phase out FEMA's direct role and push disaster response largely onto the states.
A policy that experts were already warning against.
Oh, absolutely. Experts have been saying for a while that shifting away from federal coordination would make the country less prepared, especially as climate change makes extreme weather more frequent and intense. Coastal Alaska is like ground zero for that.
So the delay wasn't an isolated incident necessarily, but maybe part of a pattern or a philosophy.
That's certainly how critics interpreted it. You see the cuts to the EPA mitigation grant before the storm, the NWS staffing issues impacting the forecast, the defunding affecting local communication, and then the delayed federal response declaration. It looks like a sequence of systemic failures driven partly by policy choices.
Okay. So, bringing it all together, what's the core takeaway here from the Alaska crisis?
I think the crisis in Alaska serves as this incredibly stark, real-world lesson. It shows how seemingly disconnected things, budget cuts affecting weather balloons, funding changes for a local radio station, ending flood prevention grants can actually combine with slow bureaucratic action to dramatically worsen the impact of climate-fueled disasters. It demonstrates how decisions made far away in D.C. can have immediate, devastating consequences on the ground, especially for vulnerable populations.
So, for you listening, what does all this really mean? If the systems we rely on to predict storms, to warn people, to provide aid, if all those are weakened at the same time, maybe by policies focused on efficiency or budget cuts, what does that say about our overall resilience as a nation? Especially as extreme weather gets more common, and particularly in these remote, uniquely vulnerable places like the Alaskan coast. It makes you wonder what other systemic weaknesses might be hiding just below the surface, waiting for the next crisis. Something to definitely think about. The real cost of trimming back essential services.